Well, we want to welcome everybody here today. This is our fall semester last impact hour, and we're so excited to have Dr. David Springer as our social work influencer this week. And Dr. Springer was actually awarded a influencer, one of the top 50 influencers in the United States. And so we've got a real life influencer here today. Dr. Springer is director of the RGK Center for Philanthropy and Community Service. He's also a university distinguished teaching professor. And most recently, he's the interim dean designate at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And I'm sure many of y'all are here today because you know of Dr. Springer and all of his awards and accolades. But I do want to mention that he really means a lot to me personally. He was my supervisor for over 15 years. We've probably been friends for nearly 20 years. And Dr. Springer has taught me so much about leadership, collaboration, compassion, and also just basically being a better human being. So I'm so thrilled to introduce you to Dr. David Springer.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. That's a really kind introduction. And it is really good. When Jenny reached out and asked if I would be available to share some time with y'all this afternoon, I mean, how do you say no to Jenny, right? So I was real excited to have this opportunity to be here today. And let me just quickly walk you through the game plan, if that's okay. I'm going to start sharing my screen in just a moment. I've got a Prezi presentation. I'm going to walk us through some slides. And then we're going to build in Q&A and discussion at the end, the last 20 minutes or so. It's a little bit interactive in the sense that I provide really small, quick opportunities for you to reflect on your own lives. So if you have a little piece of paper and a pencil and you want to jot things down for yourself, that would be great. Or use the little notes function on your computer, whatever works for you. We're going to have a couple of videos, a little music. We're just going to keep things moving. And I am going to, with that, start sharing my screen. All right. So can everyone see that okay? Just a little nod the head and all right, cool. Awesome. So really what we're focusing on today is the integration of living and leading with intention and impacting those that are within our sphere of influence. Oh, hang on. There we go. So if you would, just for a moment, imagine one way that you can, in the context of a global pandemic, a state of democracy that's unstable and in flux and a little bit frightening for a lot of us, and following the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter social movement and all of the uncertainties that come with approaching the holidays while we're still struggling with COVID-19. Think of one way just within your world, your sphere, that you can positively impact one individual over the next week. That is really going to be our focus today. It's going to be how each one of us brings the best version of ourselves to impact people that are within our immediate sphere. And we're going to do this by leaning into the intersection of what makes each of us unique, the way that we lead, the things that bring us happiness and joy, and what our unique strengths are so that we can live and lead with intention, leaving our unique thumbprint on the world to cultivate a more civil society, right? Where we are engaged in civil discourse and we can help each other grow, and that we do that together as neighbors and as a community. All right, you like the little Jack Johnson cover of Imagine? I'm gonna weave some of that stuff in today. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. The research on leadership is all over the place. And research scholars really don't agree upon a unified vision or definition or even theory of leadership. In fact, this semester I was teaching a graduate seminar, Leadership as a Catalyst for Community Change. And in that class, we were reviewing some of the various theories of leadership. In that last review, there were close to 70 different theories of leadership research published in major journals over the last several decades. If we look at a survey of the past 4 decades of leadership theory and research, whether we mean community leadership or social movements or institutional leadership, there's what we see is this increasing focus on values-based model, collaborative leadership, leadership that is more inclusive and diverse and more horizontal in the way that we approach it. So our definition, our approach, our frameworks of leadership are changing along with a more global society and some of the environmental shifts that we're all experiencing and seeing on a day-to-day basis. So that's good news for the type of work that most of us are doing. That's good news for us. And it's good for the field and good for the sector. So one of the things that I work with my students in class, because there is no unified definition of leadership, there is no one way to lead, there's no one right way to lead. I have each student really think about what their personal philosophy of leadership is. And so over the next few minutes, I'm going to share mine with you. Not that it is like an exemplar, it's just one way of thinking about it. And you'll see that it's an integration of leadership theory, values and virtues, strengths, a little existentialism based on some of my personal background that I'll share with you. And one of the books that I was drawn to early on when I was Barbara White's Associate Dean in the School of Social Work was the book that's on the left, The Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner. And this has been a book that's been around for a long time, and it resonates with me, and I'll share a little bit more about it with you in just a few moments. But suffice it to say that they surveyed more than 50,000 leaders about the best moments of leadership that they had experienced. And there were a lot of key takeaways from that research. But one of the key takeaways for me is that leadership is not about a position, but rather about having the courage and the spirit to move from whatever place we might be in to move things forward. The book on the, and I'm going to have different pictures of pretty books that we can each take a look at. And Jenny, I guess I'll share my Prezi with you at the end, so if we want to share it with others. But I'm putting pictures of books in as a way, as an alternative way to sharing a reading list, right? These are some of my favorites. I actually have a reading list that I can share with you too, if that's of interest to folks. So one of my other favorites is, well, Charlie Parker is one of my favorites. But Charlie Parker, the famous saxophonist and jazz musician, said that if you don't live it, it won't come out of your horn. Later, Bill George, who wrote the book True North, unpacked Parker's thinking for us a little bit. And in his book on authentic leadership, Bill George, who's a professor at Harvard, interviewed about 125 leaders. And one of the themes that emerged out of those interviews was that a lot of leaders have what he called crucible moments. And these crucible moments are difficult and often tragic times or moments in our lives that transform the way that we think about our own life and the way that we think about how we want to have relations with others. And so this notion of true north or being an authentic leader ask us some really important and reflective questions, such as what are your top 5 deeply held values? What is your true north? What's your reason for getting out of bed every day? What do you want to do to cultivate a more civil society? And are you living with intention every day? And that's hard during COVID, right? It's hard to wake up when there's so many uncertainties and anxiety levels are high, to bring the best version of ourselves to bear. But if there's ever a time when that has an opportunity for us to really lean into living and leading with intention, this is it, right? This is the moment where we all need to bring that slightly better version of ourselves to the extent that that's possible. And to also be compassionate with ourselves on the days when we can't, because we've all had those too. So while I put a little Charlie Parker on for you, I'd like for you to take just 30 seconds even to reflect either on these 3 questions as you think about your own true north, or to answer this question when you start thinking about your own personal narrative. Who are the individuals who've had the greatest influence on you? Could be family, could be a teacher, could be a professor, could be someone that you grew up with, it could be a colleague. And what was it about those individuals that really impacted you in the way that you think about living the best version of yourself. I'm going to pause for 30 seconds and just let you jot down a couple of notes. All right. I hope that you have an opportunity to follow up on some of that thinking. I'm actually going to do a little journaling myself later today to circle back to some of these questions. I meant to do it this morning, and then, well, that just didn't happen. So people that are that have had a really big influence on my life, of course, are my mom and dad. This is a picture of them when they were in high school. Quick story about them. They were they met at Nyack High School in Nyack, New York, just over the Tappan Zee Bridge. My mom came from a Russian family. Her dad was a real strict Russian patriarchal type of father. She wasn't allowed to wear makeup to school. She had to practice the piano for 2 hours every day after school. They only spoke Russian in the household. And what's really funny is I just did one of those ancestry DNA tests, and I'm 35% Italian. So my mom culturally was Russian. Ethnically, I'm Italian. So I'm trying to sort through all that and go back and figure out my family tree. But my mom, really in rebellion almost to having such a strict father figure, approached life with a sort of carpe diem mentality, right? She really believed in seizing the day and not letting life just sort of coast by you. Just to finish out that story for those that like Russian history, they eventually, when my mom was 2, they fled Stalin when Stalin was in power and hid out in 5 or 6 different Polish refugee camps for a number of years. And then finally, when my mom was 2, they were able to get Leo Tolstoy's daughter, Alexandra, to sponsor them to come to Reed Farm in New York. And that was how my mom's family immigrated to the States. So they came to New York. She met my dad in high school. My dad came from a long line of German blue collar workers. He worked in the auto industry his whole life. And so my dad was a great storyteller, really funny guy. And the things that I learned from him, among many others, were sort of this blue collar mentality of if you're going to do a job, do it right and roll up your sleeves and lean into it with 110% effort, right? So both of them in their own way and together had a huge impact on me. As it turns out, I didn't realize this when Jenny and Sarah reached out to me to present today, but today is the anniversary of my mom's passing. She passed away 17 years ago, 2 weeks before my son Aiden was born. And so the way that I remember her date is Aiden's birthday, right? My dad passed away in the Thanksgiving of '97, right after I moved to UT to be a brand new assistant professor in the School of Social Work. So I lost both of my parents many, many years ago. So I am Barbara White's associate dean. I'm about a year into the gig, and I realized I had no idea what I'm doing. So I went to Barbara and I said, Barbara, I really could, I'm doing this leadership stuff and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm kind of winging it. Can you please help me? So Barbara really took me under her wing and began mentoring me actively and introduced me to different leadership books. We talked about leadership a lot. We talked about leadership at the intersection of race, ethnicity, gender, age, cultural upbringing, and had some really lovely, powerful conversations over many years. So while Barbara was mentoring me, was when my mom's cancer, multiple myeloma and leukemia came back, and she passed away quickly, and then my son Aiden was born. So as is often the case when a new life intersects with death, I was faced with my own mortality and reflected on, it was my crucible moment, one of my crucible moments, as Bill George would indicate, in my own life, in the way that I began to think about how I wanted to approach what it meant to be a quote unquote leader when we think about the impact that we have on others. And so that provided me with this opportunity really to lean into spirituality and existentialism to help me grapple with some of those big life questions. And we can ask these questions of ourselves, and we can also ask these questions of the organizations and the communities that we're a part of, right? What have I done? Who have I been? What have I wanted to be? Is there still time? That's a picture of my son and I at Quack's Bakery in Hyde Park when he was much younger. And then a picture of us on the trail in Telluride, Colorado, a summer or two ago. He's taller than I am now. It's just not right. So I really began weaving in existentialism with the help of Bob Solomon, who has also passed away and was a professor of philosophy here at UT Austin. And so this is what I came up with from my own personal philosophy of leadership. You can see on the bottom left, and I'm not very creative, so all you get from me is a Venn diagram. I'm really sorry about that. Like, there's got to be visually a better way of doing this that I just don't, my brain doesn't work that way. So on the bottom left, you can see that I lean into transformational leadership, which encourages us to engage in 5 practices. And those 5 practices are to model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. And I really lean into those still every day when I think about how I want to navigate the world. Over to the right, you can see sort of a modified version of the core values of social work. For those of you that know the 6 values of social work, you'll see a couple of those woven in there. And then in the upper left, you see that existential piece, that authenticity piece, where I believe in fully engaging in life, working with one another, that life lesson from my mom. I could just as easily integrate servant leadership into this as a leadership theory that sort of grounds me. But you can see how it's this, we don't just pick a theory of leadership and then mechanically act upon it. It is a personal journey to think about how we want to lead and how we want to impact others. And it is a messy, a sort of woven fabric of our family and our values and our background and our culture and our crucible moments in life. So since it was the anniversary of my mom's passing, I thought we should take some advice from my mom today. And we've already talked about a couple of these, but the first one's really important. It's this notion that leadership is not about a position that we hold. It's about how we navigate the world. So we can all lead from where we are because we can all impact others from where we are. So if we're waiting to have that promotion or to move sort of through our career before we think of ourselves as leaders, that's one of the myths that I want to bust today. That we each have the capacity to lead now, given where we are in our professional and in our personal lives. The second is to sort of goes hand in glove with the first, but it's one that I hang on to, which is wake up every day and to really think about what I want that day to look like for myself and for others. And then the third one is to be happy. Now this may sound a little glib, but I really want to dial in on this third one, right? And then we're going to circle back to number 1. But I want to unpack what I mean when I say when we talk about happiness. And I want to see if I can share with you my thinking about why that is such an integral part of the way that I have come to think about leadership and how we influence others. Uh-oh. All right, hang on. I'm going to pause just for a moment, and I'm going to go find my spot. All right, there's my mom. So we're going to go here. All right. Go back one. Okay. So my mom encouraged me to be happy, right? She wasn't the first one. Going back to Aristotle when he was teaching at Lyceum, asserted that happiness is a virtuous activity of the soul. If we begin to really unpack what we mean by that and how that impacts our ability to lead, there are these 3 pillars or anchors that I want to unpack over the next few minutes. The first is a network of close relationships. The second is engagement and meaning. And the third is positive attitude and gratitude. But before we jump into that network of close relationships, I just want to give a shout out to Marty Seligman, who, when he was president of the American Psychological Association in the late 90s, I think it was 97, realized that the whole field of psychology, clinical psych in particular, had built itself a foundation of figuring out what was wrong with people. In fact, if you came in to see a clinical psychologist, it was not uncommon to leave with more than one diagnosis, right? Because that's the business model. And so Seligman, who had built his entire career and gotten tenure by studying clinical depression, essentially said, what if as a field, what if we shifted our thinking and really started studying with intention the positive deviants, the positive outliers? How do we move the average up to people that are extremely high functioning and just seem to be ahead of the rest of us? And what can we learn from those individuals in terms of the way they think about the world, how they navigate the world, the skills they have? And so thus was born the field of positive psychology as a discipline. And there are some folks at UT Austin that actually study positive psychology as a field and as a discipline. So this may be one of the most important ways to think about happiness for me. If we divided each of our happiness pies into these slices, most of us have sort of a baseline set level of happiness, and that accounts for about 50% of our happiness pie. 10% of our happiness pie is determined by external life circumstances, where we live, where we work, whether we're married or not, whether we get a college degree or not. By the way, getting an undergrad degree tends to help and boost our levels of happiness. Getting a graduate degree doesn't help at all. So for those of you that are in grad school, I'm really sorry about that, but the research is pretty compelling on that one. And then, so if I know everything about your life and you tell me that story, when it comes to external circumstances, I only understand about 10% about what makes you happy, right? And this is the 10% is what most of us focus on. When I get my degree, then I'll be happy. When I get the job, then I'll be happy. When I have a larger house, then I'll be happy. When I get the next promotion, then I'll be happy. And what it does is it creates this arrival fallacy trap where every time we reach that goal, our minds move the goal. And so we tend to push our happiness over the cognitive horizon and we never reach it. We never obtain happiness. Happiness begins in the moment. And it's that intentional activity that I want to focus on with you today. It's that 40% of waking up and doing things that we know from research over the course of decades now lead to increased levels of dopamine and serotonin and just more robust, full lives. And that's why I've got a picture of a guy surfing, because that's one of the things that brings me happiness. Okay. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay. In memento. All right. Let's go to this one. So before I share this short clip with you, the one thing I want to say about focusing on things that bring us happiness is what we focus on matters, right? It was like the late 1970s, there was a professor of physics that discovered something. He discovered something that he called the quantum Zeno effect. George Sudarshan, physics professor at UT in 1977, and basically applied to neuroscience. QZE states that the mental act of focusing attention stabilizes those associated brain circuits. So concentrating our attention on something, a thought, an insight, a picture in our mind's eye, a fear, maintains the brain state that arises in association with that experience. So over time, if we pay enough attention to any specific connection in our brain, it keeps those relative circuits open and dynamically alive. And then it shifts from not just a chemical link, but a stable physical change in the brain structure, right? So the good news is that when we focus on kindness, gratitude, virtues, we can change the physical structure of our brain around those circuits. It's self-directed neuroplasticity. So when we think about ourselves as trying to influence the world around us, we can help others focus on the positive, leave problem behaviors in the past, and really focus on identifying and creating new behaviors, new ways of living for us and for others that help sort of cement those dominant pathways in the brain. I try it out with my son all the time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? But when I'm supervising somebody, if you think about most of our HR systems, they are focusing on what people do wrong and having them address what they're doing wrong. And instead, I want all of us to lean into our strengths and to think creatively about how we can move forward. So instead of asking somebody to diagnose their problem over and over again, I'll ask them something like, if we were meeting in 3 months and you'd been successful in navigating this challenge, what would that look like? So we start to activate a different part of the brain when we ask those sort of solution focused questions, right? So that's my brief overview of positive psychology and neuroscience. Remember that my mom and Aristotle's first anchor was our need to belong, the importance of human connection and relationships. So for those of you that are a little more seasoned, you might remember the original Candid camera. And this is a quick clip from the original Candid camera.
And subsequently, one other member. The gentleman in the elevator now is a Candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with a white shirt, the lady with a trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality. Little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the Candid subject. Here comes the Candid camera staff, 3 of them each. And this man has apparently been in groups before. Here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First, he makes a full turn to the rear. Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed position. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we can reverse the procedure? What?
It's awesome, isn't it? So our need to belong to groups and our need to have those connections with others is really powerful. I actually miss riding in elevators with people during COVID. So one of the other myths I want to bust, I'm pulling from design thinking out of Stanford, which is this notion that we don't have to figure out life on our own. Design thinkers encourage us to engage in what they call radical collaboration. And radical collaboration is reaching out to people proactively to be a part of our life design team. And we can think of these people in terms of, people that we're intimate with, husband, wives, partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, people that are good friends, supporters of us, mentors and possible mentors. And so what I'd like to encourage you to do is take just a few seconds to begin to jot down even a couple of names of people that you might want to reach out to. Just if they're a part of your life already, you want to reconnect with them. If they're not a part of your life and you've been wanting to get to know them, you can invite them to a virtual cup of coffee. It is, it's really rare that someone will say no to this ask, right? If someone calls you and says, hey, Mary, I would like to have like a virtual cup of coffee with you because I know about your work and I just want to kick a couple of things around and learn more about the way you're thinking about some things that I'm thinking about. That's the ask, right? Most people are flattered by that, and we all like those connections, and we're willing to have those conversations. So building a life design team, once you've identified the individuals, the ask is not that hard, right? So take a few more seconds and just think about who some of those individuals might be for you. All right. Keep working on that over the course of the day and the week, particularly as we enter sort of the Thanksgiving and the holiday season. I love this book, by the way, Designing Your Life. It's one of my favorites right now. I use it in my classes. I'm teaching a freshman seminar this semester, Designing a Happy and Meaningful Life. And this is one of the books that we use in that class, and the students loved it as well. These guys just came out with another one, Designing Your Work. So they've got one for professional living as well. But I would probably start, if this is appealing to you, I might start with this one first. All right. So I mentioned that we often approach supervisory relationships in particular by identifying areas, other people's growing edges, right? And helping them navigate that. And that's important. It's important to address our growing edges. But we have to couple that with helping each other reflect upon our strengths, because it's our strengths that allows us to address our growing edges, right? We can't address growing edges from a deficit. So there are different surveys that you can take to reflect upon your strengths. This book, Strengths-Based Leadership, is one of those. It comes with a survey in the back. But if you could identify just one strength that you intuitively know that you have, give yourself a gift today and think about how that strength makes you a great partner or a great friend. And then think about how you can lean into that strength over the course of this week to be even a better partner or a better friend to one individual, right? So, and we'll talk more about that when we get to that third pillar. But I just wanted to plant that question for you to reflect on with your own timing. So the second pillar is engagement and meaning. Again, one of my favorite books, and I'm having a lot of my friends read, Practical Wisdom, The Right Way to Do the Right Thing. Barry Schwartz and Kenneth Sharp are a couple of professors at Swarthmore, and they take Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and talk about how we need more applied practical wisdom to navigate ambiguity in complex systems. And the three case examples they use throughout the book are healthcare, education, and the legal system. It's a fascinating, fun read. It's one of my favorites. But one of the things, after teaching Designing a Happy and Meaningful Life for 15 years, one of the takeaways for me from that class is that for my own life, this is not a universal truth, but for my own life, when I am half-assing it, or when I am sort of not leaning into the person or the situation that's in front of me, and I'm not fully engaged, if I do that long enough, I can feel my happiness level dipping, right? That part of my dashboard's not full. But when I'm fully engaged with the people, the life, the context, the situation that's in front of me, and I really lean into it, whether I like it or not, when I really lean into it and show up, I just feel more alive, right? And so for me, the engagement piece is something that has bubbled to the top as being really important for my own consistent level of maintaining some semblance of happiness. And then meaning is something we're all striving for, right? We want to know that what we do makes the lives of others better. And that's why many of us went into the professions that we did. Japanese culture refers to some of this stuff as using the term ikigai. And the concept means a reason for being. And it's this much more colorful Venn diagram than my leadership Venn, but it's the intersection of what you love, what the world needs, what you're good at, right? You want to be competent, and what you can be paid for. And so usually if those first three, what you're good at, what you love, and what the world needs intersect, you're going to find a way to get paid for it. But we tend to, one of the things I'm working on a lot with my freshmen is to get out of that bottom part of that Venn. They're so focused on what they can get paid for, and they lose sight of the other three parts of the Venn. And so it's having this more balanced approach to how we want to live professionally and personally. Because the ikigai doesn't just apply to careers, right? It applies to how we want to spend our personal time and how we want to cultivate the relationships and the personal domains of our lives as well. Okay. And so we hit the third pillar, suggested by Aristotle and my mom, which is to have a positive attitude and gratitude. Marty Seligman, remember the guy that was the father of the positive psychology movement, is a professor at Penn. And Seligman said that there are three elements to happiness: pleasure, engagement, and meaning, right? So we just talked about engagement and meaning when we were looking at the book on practical wisdom. This third element is to really slow down and day to day savor life's joys and pleasures. And the research behind some of this stuff is really interesting to me. If we send one kind email a day for 30 days, what we see is a boost on our own level of happiness. Because remember, when we think about self-directed neuroplasticity, we are now changing the physical composition and structure of our brain because we're getting those neurons firing because we're doing nice things, right? So acts of kindness are really great, not just for the person receiving the act of kindness, but they're good for us too. And it helps us then bring a better version of ourselves to address these really complex social challenges that we want to address in our work and in our lives. Gratitude is such an impactful part of this third anchor that it's considered by positive psychologists to be a meta strategy. In other words, when we express gratitude, particularly on days when we're feeling low, so we have chapters in our lives that aren't going that great, or we have days in our lives where we're feeling kind of down, when we can express gratitude to somebody for the impact they're having on our lives or because they did something kind for us, what we see is the level of impact it has on sadness and happiness is inverse, and it's really powerful. And the sadder we are, the more gratitude has an impact on us as the giver of the gratitude, not just as the recipient. The other thing that's really important about this stuff is when our brains are operating at these positive thresholds rather than at negative, neutral, or stressed thresholds, we are more efficient and accurate in our decision making. We are more able to show up and be present with our colleagues at work and with our family members. So some of these activities and some of these ways of thinking about this stuff, it helps us have a positive impact on others. It's not just a self-serving sort of activity or way of being. So it's a reverse formula, right? We're taught from a young age that if we are successful, then we'll be happy. And that's how we end up pushing our happiness out over the cognitive horizon. But the positive psychology formula is reversed, that if we can cultivate happiness and meaning and joy in our lives through acts of kindness and through gratitude and through close social relationships and robust social networks, that happiness will lead to success. This gentleman, Rod Raghunathan, is a professor at the B School here at UT. He's doing some work in this space, and I love this book as well. If you're so smart, why aren't you happy? Okay. So another reflective question to sort of think about is, if we borrow from the Greeks, in what ways am I helping to bring the good, the true, and the beautiful into the policies, lives, and actions for which I'm responsible, right? How do we bring the best version of ourselves to cultivate a more civil society? And the beautiful part about all of this is our lives, the script of our lives is not written in pen or Sharpie. It's written in pencil. So if your life was a film, if you're not willing to watch an infinite amount of times, what can you do about that, right? How can we rewrite our own script moving forward? Because it is written in pencil, and we have an opportunity every day to rewrite parts of that script. And so before we open it up for Q&A, I just want to ground us with this notion of kindness and compassion as a way to impact others and ourselves. And what you will experience when you watch this clip, I hope, is what I experience every time I see it. And it's called elevation. Even if we're not involved in the act of kindness, just by watching two other people be kind to each other, our own mood will elevate, right? And so think about that for your work environment or within your family system or within your network of friends. As you engage in acts of kindness, what are the positive ripple effects that you can have on the people that are part of your network?
จะได้อะไรถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวันเขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลยไม่ได้รวยขึ้นไม่ได้ออกทีวีไม่มีใครรู้จักไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้นเพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุขได้เข้าใจได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุด
It's kind of beautiful, isn't it? So I think with that, I'd like to, so that gentleman that we just saw in that video, that's leadership, right? He is impacting people within his sphere of influence. And that is the way I want all of us to move forward in the world as we think about ourselves as leaders, not by a position that we hold, but by a way that we exist and relate to others. And I think with that, Jenny, I'm going to stop screen sharing and we can open it up for Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Springer. Man, that was deep. That was really good. We had a few questions that were submitted.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is humility pivotal to be a good leader?
Yes. Next question. No, I'll say it's such an important question, particularly right now. I think you have to have be grounded in morals and virtues to be an effective leader. And I think one of the most important ones is a lack of hubris. So humility, the ability to admit that you don't know, the capacity to listen and be present in the moment, not just to impose your will, but to bring people together in an inclusive way to create a shared vision and move forward together in that vision is the way that we need more leaders that have the capacity and the way of being to do that work. Because leadership, when things are going really well, is easy, right? But when leadership really challenges us when we're navigating ambiguity. And when we navigate ambiguity, we have to be humble, right? Otherwise, somebody would have figured it out by now. So the answer is unequivocally yes. We need leaders that embrace humility and bring others in to help them create a shared understanding.
Thank you. I want to open it up to the group. You can unmute your line. Do you all have questions, comments, reflections?
And Jenny, before I forget, I can send you and Sarah a reading list that you can send out to others. I've got it as a PDF and I'll just send that along.
Thank you. We'll
Yeah.
make sure they get it.
Cool.
Did you have something, Mary?
Me?
Yeah.
Uh, Not anything in particular, but I totally really loved this talk. Came at a really good time when so many things are really hard right now. So thank you, David, for making some really, really big concepts, things we can really bite into and understand.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Mary. And it's good to see you, by the way. I think we all need this little refresher right now, right? Like it's been a tough year. 2020 has been hard. And so the election took a lot out of a lot of us. Cases are spiking again on COVID. State of our democracy is kind of in flux. Like this has not been the best of years. But it doesn't mean that we can still practice some of the things that we're talking about today, not to have things be perfect, but to soften the blow a little bit, right?
I think we have another question from Aaron Escajeda.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question, more of a comment. I think I'm a dual LBJ social work student, and I'm a peer mentor for the first years and a
Cool.
peer policy group leader at LBJ school. So I that's something that I try to tell incoming students and first year students, that don't forget to like have happiness throughout the program, because there's always going to be another assignment, there's always going to be another paper, there's always going to be some more research to be done, but it's not gonna, at the end of the day, it's not gonna bring you that fulfillment. And I don't know, I see my peers like stressing out so much and having such a hard time, but I always think to myself, I'm either doing something really wrong or something really right through grad school, that I'm not constantly in like a crisis mode. So I think that's just very important. It's don't take yourself so serious through everything, because there's always going to be more work to do, but there's not going to be happiness that we can like recover from the past.
Yeah, it's a really great insight, Aaron. I think, being grounded, right, and what matters in life is so critical. My mom used to say to me all the time, is this going to matter to you when you're on your deathbed? And almost every time the answer was no, not at all. And so that made it easier to let go of things, right, that I was hanging on to in the way of stress and anxiety. And the other thing you're grasping onto, Aaron, is that you don't have to wait to finish grad school to be happy. There is no beautiful rainbow on the other side. We have to start living in the moment, even because life is messy and stressful. It's the fundamental nature of it. And so if you can practice some of that, you can cultivate that now, you're ahead of most. So that's really awesome. I love that. John Milton, who wrote the poem Paradise Lost, he talked about education, Aaron, and he said, I will point ye out the right path of a virtuous and noble education, laborious indeed at the first ascent, but how so smooth, so green, and full of goodly prospect, that the harp of Orpheus was not more charming, with melodious sounds on every side. And so I think once you make that, what John Milton he was talking to you, man. When John Milton wrote that poem, really what he was saying was that growing is hard, right? Getting an education is not easy. But if we can immerse ourselves, if we can engage in that process, it is melodious. It is a beautiful thing to experience our growing edges by understanding new ways of knowing and thinking. So that's good stuff.
We had one other question that was submitted. Do you have any recommendations or recommended practices for students when it comes to setting intentions during school?
Yes, this is such a tough one. I know, because I remember being in graduate school myself and just being completely overwhelmed by the amount of readings, by the number of papers I had to write, by feeling as if I had sort of lost a sense of autonomy with my time, because you were literally, as a grad student, you're kind of moving from one deadline to the next, right? And the professors, we don't coordinate calendars. Like, we hit y'all at once, usually at the end of the semester. So most of you are probably, if you're in grad school, you're slammed right now. And so Jenny, there are some little things that we can do. If we go back to those 3 pillars, right? The importance of human relationships and close connections. So the first thing is to know that you're not alone, to have a support system around you. And it doesn't matter if it's family, other classmates, close friends from childhood, a partner or a spouse, whoever those people are that help you feel as if you're not alone. That's really important right now because COVID is isolating us, right? We don't get to see our people as much as we want to see our people. So being intentional about reaching out in that way. On days when you're feeling overwhelmed, it really does help to engage in some form of mindfulness, and it doesn't matter what it is. I'm terrible about, like, I am not a good meditator, right? Terrible at it. I've tried it, I'm not good at it. But my form of meditation, my backyard backs up to the green belt. So I go for a trail run in the morning with my dog. And that is when I don't even think a lot about stuff. I'm kind of just blissed out. But being in nature, being on the trail with my dog, paddleboarding on Lady Bird Lake, whatever that's, for some it's yoga, whatever the form of activity or being still is for you that recharges you. Man, even if you can block out 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night before you go to bed, we're not the Dalai Lama. We're not going to meditate for 5 hours in the morning, right? But if you can do a little bit in the morning and a little bit at the end of the day, it helps. So just look for little ways. It's not a transformational overhaul of your life. It's the little things that kind of keep you going when you're really stressed out.
I'm so glad you said that about meditation because it is a big thing right now. And for some of us, it's really hard. But
trail running is my meditation, right? There are ways to be mindful without meditating.
For sure.
Yeah.
We have one last question. Any advice for working students during the pandemic?
Yes. Gosh, bless you. When I was a doctoral, well, I've been working since I was 15, right? So I'm a first generation college student. Had to work my way through college. I was working through undergrad, usually anywhere from 20 hours upward, all through undergrad, master's, and doctorate. And so I appreciate the struggle of that balance. Oh my gosh, I'm sort of channeling a former a clinical faculty member in the School of Social Work, Ruth Rubio, who used to give lessons on time management, right? There are some basic things that we can do to this, and this may be, think about where your gaps are in terms of your ability to self-care. And there are 2 teams that I'm working on building right now for myself as I step into the interim dean role. I'm building up an advisory council and a care team, right? So the care team are people that just recharge me, people I talk to that make me feel better. I've got a guy doing my yard. He's part of my care team because I don't have time to do the yard right now. There are little things that we can do to take care of ourselves. And then the advisory council is, on a personal level, are people that I can call when I feel stuck or when I'm overwhelmed. So if you're a working student and you're struggling in 1 or 2 particular ways, talk to Jenny and tap into her network and think about who you can reach out to or call that can help you get unstuck, because you don't have to do it on your own, right? For me, it was being really extremely intentional about waking up earlier in the morning to get a head start on the day. I had to give up, I prioritized college football over the NFL. So I was a Florida State student, so I went to game day on Saturdays, but I didn't watch any football on Sundays, and that was the trade-off I made. So being really intentional about what your trade-offs are. But the most important thing probably is really identifying what you think your growing edges are, where you're overwhelmed, where you're stuck, and then tapping into the network that you have available to you to get different ideas about how to navigate that. And Jenny's a great starting point because she's been doing this for a little while now. So she's a great resource in that way.
Yeah, that I really like what you said about just kind of stopping to talk to someone or to kind of get your priorities in check, because I know when I was a grad student, like everything seemed important, and there were things that were glass balls and rubber balls, and the rubber balls could be dropped and there was no problem. They'll bounce back up, but a glass ball would break, and you can't let those glass balls break. And so I think it's really great to invest a little bit of time talking to someone that will help you to kind of get your priorities straight.
That's an awesome metaphor, by the way. I love that one.
Thank you.
Shauna, it's good to see you too. Haven't seen you in a while. Hi.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for coming today. And Dr. Springer, great as always, boss.
Thanks
We're
for the invitation.
lucky to have you on campus and as a friend.